Hello, and welcome to an introduction to the Little Boat Wars. But it's not really Little Boat Wars, because very quickly, whilst doing this, I decided that I covered pretty much most of the technical details of the motor torpedo boats and the launches which they used. And there was rather a far more thorny and complicated subject I needed to get into first. And oh, well, that's been helped by, John Laffin's book, Raiders, Great Exploits of the Second World War, Royal Marines Commandos, The SAS, The History of the Special Raiding Squadron, Paddy's Men by Stuart McLean, The Giant Book of the SAS and the Special Forces. Honestly, it always sounds strange to some people when someone who's a professional historian has these sort of giant books, but actually, this one by Terry White is incredibly useful if, let's say, your natural hemisphere operations is aquatic and uses rather larger guns. And John Parker, SBS. And this is really what we're going to be talking about, whether they be the special boat service, the special boat section, the special boat this, the special boat that, the full boat this, the full boat that. That's basically what I'm going to be talking about to try and give an overview of these forces. And hopefully you find it useful, because this is part of the world they come up in. And what's really interesting is actually taking this in the Mediterranean and looking at it without some of the wider context going on, because you have to remember these operations were taking place worldwide. And honestly, at some point, I'm going to have to do the ones in the Far East, because I'm going to have to follow one of my heroes in terms of putting the history together. But you'll be able to work out who that is quite quickly. Right. Hopefully, not too much bias will come in because of that. So, MTBs, MGBs, SBS, SAS operations in the Mediterranean during World War II. This is Tony Penfold. This is a Patreon video, so thank you very much to Tony. And I hope you enjoy it. Live will, of course, be later tonight, this evening, at 6 o'clock usually. Bilge pumps. Tomorrow, the Michael Clapp special comes out. I will send them the tweets tonight. But leaving that to one side, that is going to be, it's a double feature special. It's a two-parter. It's amazing. We haven't actually recorded this next week's episode yet. You do normally record it on a Tuesday. We couldn't today. And we'll get it done. It'll be out for next week. But yeah, you've got a double parter coming out this week. It's going to be fun. So, the development of small boats and special forces. And here's the thing. It does like to do that, doesn't it? There. Right. The quote on the left. Hang on. The quote on the right. Hang on. The left of the screen as you view it. Yes. Your mobility depends upon your requisitioning or commandeering local craft to remove your detachments, watching possible landing places. Doesn't sound really much commando-like. Well, that's because it isn't. They're the independent companies. And the independent companies were this sort of idea that, oh, goodness me, we're getting mullered in Norway. How do we deal with this? Well, let's start raiding, doing irregular operations. Let's start doing everything from the toolbook. The trouble is they have nothing set up. When they're first talking about this, they actually instantly start going, well, the Royal Marines, where are the Royal Marines? And they look and go, the Royal Marines everywhere around the world doing all sorts of stuff. Okay. Because This is going to sound funny. This had been the operation which the Royal Marines had been used for. If you consider independent companies and what they're being set up, that's exactly what the Royal Marines usually do from aboard ships. In fact, these units would be based aboard ship. They wouldn't be based in barracks. When they were back in port, they'd be billeted in private people's houses. They were not going to be regular units at all. They were an extension of the Royal Marines, but then Royal Marines didn't have enough numbers to do this job and all the other stuff they were doing, so the army were being called on to provide them. And they are so light. Eventually, they do get to the strength of, I think, roughly 10 companies, and maybe even 12. There is a debate. Quite a reasoned debate for that, but there is a debate. Because whilst they're still true, they then start organizing the proper commando effort, and some of them get folded into that, and some of them move to different things, and it's just it's a nightmare to try and untangle. There are actual specialist historians who specialize in the subject, and there aren't many members of my field who I actually generally feel sympathy for their love, because it's a passion, it's what you do. But I have to say that the special forces ones, the more I get into this particular knotty issue, looking at the raids is one thing, and that's quite easy, but figuring out which unit is actually doing the raids, in terms of not the men, that we can work out the men, but are they the special boat squad section? Are they the full boat section, the SAS? Are they this? There are so many different options. It's just, give me a second, please. In an earlier recording of this, I basically said it's nuts. The different organizations, and it is a bit. But you have this all sort of going on, and roughly in sort of the beginning of 1940, you have our captain, well, Lieutenant Roger Jumbo Courtney. Now, Roger is a bit of an interesting chap. He's possibly one of my favourite characters from World War II. I put him up there with Philip Vian. Mainly because he's this unassuming character who accomplishes quite a lot. His main point in a sort of he done things like canoed down the Danube for his honeymoon with his wife. He must have had one of the most understanding wives ever. You know, it's always a fun being partnered with well, I suppose on either side of the relationship, if you're partner with an eccentric person. But in this case, I think they're both equally eccentric and support each other's eccentricities to a great degree. In fact, I am regularly, the more I read up about his wife, the more I was surprised. At no point is it found that she managed to jump into one of the canoes herself and go off to raid the Nazis. She certainly seems like the sort of lady who would have given it half a go if she'd had a chance. I'm not sure how he managed to persuade her not to. But they take Buttercup for a canoe down the Danube, and Buttercup is a full boat, a folding kayak, and he actually takes Buttercup with him to war. So Buttercup is donated to the war effort with the blessing of his wife, because the basic phrase is, "If I can't keep you safe, Buttercup will." And that is a phrase one never expects to hear when one's looking at naval history. If I can't keep you safe, Buttercup will. It just doesn't compute. But leaving that to one side, the full boat troop is formed with 12 men, including one other officer. And he gets it formed by doing a rather naughty trick on the Royal Navy. The Glengyle is sitting in harbour. There is a meeting ashore of naval officers and senior officers, including Sir Roger Keyes, I think. either there shortly afterwards or is there for the meeting. And Courtney's been making the case for his unit. It's been falling on deaf ears. So he does what any other self-respecting officer would do. He takes his buttercup and he launches a raid on the Glengale, which is one of the landing ships not far offshore. He steals a gun cover from it and all sorts of other little things, puts some writing on the captain's door, goes to the meeting, drops the gun cover and goes, "Look, this is what we can do." And they go, "Okay, prove you can do it again." So he does it again. And this time, though, the captain of the Glengale knows he's coming. So he gets up to the Glengale. He manages to do some chalk marks suggesting where he'd leave limpet mines if given the opportunity. But there is a rope dangling down the side. And it's just too much temptation. It's just too much. So Courtney goes up the rope and finds a trap waiting for him, positioned by the captain. So he gets captured. But he's impressed everyone, and they allow him to form his unit. He gets 12 men. He gets 7 more full boats, which are interesting things. That's a full boat. It starts in 1940, but they actually get properly deployed in 1941. They're technically deployed to Egypt under the command of Lay Force, which is a couple of more regular commando units, if you can use the phrase regular and commando in the same subject, and the special boat section. And basically, the idea is the SBS will do the reconnaissance, and then the commandos will go and do the raiding or the operation. In this point, they're looking at Rhodes, which seems to have a very small garrison. And so what they're thinking is that actually Lay Force, with proper training, speed, mobility on its side, and some very hefty naval firepower behind it, could either launch a massive raid or possibly, just possibly, take Rhodes. Which would be important because it's Kingdom, admittedly. Now, at least they felt they could take out the airbase and the harbour and cause a huge amount of damage. They send in HMS Triumph, and they send in, again, Buttercup. And basically, Captain Courtney, by this point, he takes a Lieutenant Commander Nigel Wilmot with him, Royal Navy, because the reason they're doing this reconnaissance is after experience in Norway, and that's a really big factor, experience in Norway, they realize that, frankly, these things are going to be very, very dangerous. They're going to be very difficult in terms of any amphibious operation. And the more precise information you can get about the beach, the more precise information you can get out things to navigate from, fixtures and points, the better. So he takes a naval officer with him, who he's given a few weeks to train up to his standard. They don't have to spend time eating moss like the original first 12 SBS gentlemen did. So they conduct reconnaissance for 3 nights, and actually on the third one, Courtney gets into trouble. He gets cramp. You can say he pushed it too far, you can say he gets stress, whatever, he gets cramp. And Wilmot rescues him. When I say rescues him, he's sitting on the beach and cramping up and has attracted the attention of a noisy dog. And he has, how do I put this? Lost his torch. So he can't signal to the submarine. So if Wilmot hadn't found them, he would have been dead. That's it, pretty much. Now, if I can find in here. Yes, there is. A third night was spent making a beach recce through Triumph's periscope, and on the fourth and final night they set off again for the shore. Courtney swam to one beach, leaving Wilmot to travel a little further down the coast. Wilmot was to return and pick up Courtney. So, Wilmot kayaking, Courtney goes for a swim off the kayak, who would signal his position by dim torchlight. Courtney, however, ran into triple trouble. He suffered severe cramp while swimming, and as he lay writhing on the beach, he attracted the attention of a noisy dog, and then to cap it all, his torch failed. Wilmot managed to find him and brought him to safety only minutes before an enemy patrol appeared on the beach. Had Courtney been caught, he would undoubtedly have been shot. This was the first major beach reconnaissance of its kind. Both men were decorated for their mission. Unfortunately, though, nothing comes of it, and we'll get into this later, but basically there is a classic mistake made with special forces, and it's to do with Crete. It's always to do with Crete. It's kind of like when I'm talking about various ships, I can always tell you which gun's going to cause trouble because it's the same one, usually in that little class of ships. In this scenario, in the Mediterranean, if something goes wrong with the best laid plans of my cement, it's usually Crete. So, they start off as a reconnaissance asset. And then they change. Well, they don't really change. They've always been sort of doing a little bit of light explosives, but this is very much a force maximization. We have these wonderful submarines operating out of Malta, called Tent Flotilla. And they're really small and can get very close inshore. But they don't carry much in the way of a decent deck gun for attacking land targets. This causes Courtney and his second in command, Lieutenant Robert, I think, Doug Wilson. Let me just check. It's back here. Lieutenant Robert Doug Wilson. Yep. To go, we have a cunning plan. And they do. And on around about the 22nd of June 1941, this plan has fruition. A railway tunnel near Mount Etna is spotted on the map, but they reconnoiter it through the periscope, and Wilson and Hughes, a Royal Marine, go in. There are some fishermen off the beach, but they manage to quietly get round them. They hide their boat, they make it to the entrance to the tunnel. They decide to go further down into the tunnel. They brought a pickaxe with them, but rather than use it and risk making a lot of noise so that people hear them, they use their hands to scrape away carefully the dirt around the track so they can put a special contact mine on the rails. And basically, what it works by is as the train goes over, it pushes down the electrodes to make contact, and that sets off the charge. And so basically, it's a railway line mine, and they put this quite far into the tunnel. And they're just finishing off this, and what do you know? The light goes green. Crane coming. So they have to get out. And they do. They manage to get out. Again, they have to avoid the fishermen. But they're worried about this mine because sometimes they work, sometimes they don't. And the train seems to be taking its time. They get back to the submarine. They get on the submarine. Submarine stays close watching. They think they see an explosion, but they're not really sure till the next day when they have to raise their periscope up in broad daylight to spot them and see all the people working on the railway line to try and pull the train out and all the things. And that's the thing. It's just been hit. It's the SBS operations like this are why at one point the Italian military seems to think that they have a partisan or a communist problem. And they don't. They have a British getting onto their beaches problem. You can understand why they might think the otherwise, because they might think, why else? What is the purpose of doing this all? It's all such basic, simple, lower-level attacks because it causes a lot of problems and it maximizes the presence again of those submarines and gives them more strike. And speaking of that particular submarine, on its way out, it manages to bag itself a cruiser. Yeah, HMS Urge does well. My cruiser. They then get depth charged, but they survive depth charging and get back. And that's how they start doing their operations. These operations are very much going along, using your brain, spotting out something and thinking about it. And one of the interesting things about the men, especially that Courtney picks and what Courtney's looking for, is he says he doesn't want the sort of men who jump in through a front door, shooting their guns off and killing everyone in a blaze of gunfire. He wants the sort of men who will spot that there's a side window which is unlocked, go in through there, and then take out everyone quickly and quietly so that no one ever realizes it happened till someone comes in the house the next day. It's interesting. So, Lay Force is sent to Crete. Lay Force is used to do a Special Forces unit, which is basically Commandos, like high-speed hitting unit, which is used to fight in the regular fighting line. This might work. I'm thinking, of course, of parts of the Northern European post-D-Day campaign, where you do get Commandos being used, the Special Services Brigades and these sort of things, being used as part of the fighting force. But as a rule, those units, those Commandos which are used are far heavily armed and far, they have all sorts of equipment. They're light forces, but they're not that light, and there is medium and heavy forces and a lot of on-call air power at their disposal. In other words, it works because they have a lot of backup, and it's perfect. Well, as close to perfect as war ever gets for an operational scenario. Crete is not. Crete is terrible. Crete is confusion. In fact, it's confusion on both sides. Both sides are equally confused. Seriously, Crete is the most muddled battle. You're sitting looking at Crete and you're going, Really, what happens at Crete is a lot of senior officers either need to start managing to do their job of coordinating things or get out of the way. And the only thing is that the Germans and Italian forces were luckier in that with the air power they managed to string up, and the fact that the Royal Navy only had one carrier and she was down to minimal aircraft and she gets damaged launching a raid. That's HMS Formidable. Trying to sort of even that attack up by taking out the primary Stuka base on Stocky. Yeah. It's not good. It's not good. Now, you're going to ask me about the phrase, the Latin phrase. That was technically the SBS's first motto. Ex Grecia Tori Asturis Frustrata. Bullshit baffles brains. It's a good one. Anyway, so whilst Courtney gets sent home to work with Mountbatten, there is a less polite turn of phrase I can put on that, but basically Courtney is called home. Keyes has left Combined Operations Command, and Mountbatten's been having fun for a few months, so Courtney gets called home for that. And the SBS do a sort of operation called Operation Albumen. They attack 4 airfields jointly with the SAS. They lose a lot of troops. It works, have a big impact, but they start to lose people. They really do. And this keeps going on because the SAS style of operations and the SBS style of operations are very different, and the forces have been trained slightly differently. Who dares wins versus Excreta Tora Astros Frustrata. But more importantly, David Sterling is building up quite an empire, and the SBS basically get drawn into it at this point. Now, back in the UK, there is something else going on, and this is an interesting group which will get drawn into the SBS circle later on in the thing, but I want to talk about them now. They're 62 Commando. They conduct some operations, and they are pretty much boat attack specialists. In that, where you've got the SBS are canoes and kayak specialists, the small scale raiding force are high speed boats. They do operations Postmaster, Barricade, Dryad, Acquaint, and Basalt. Now, Basalt has a bit of a bad taste in most people's mouths, but they also do Huckabuck, Batman, Fahrenheit, and all sorts of things. I was in Brantford as well. But these are some of the big ones, and Basalt is... Well, it's the one which apparently is part of the factors which leads to the commando order where Hitler says all commandos must be executed. Because some Germans who had been captured during the commando raid tried to get away and were, of course, shot trying to escape, and they were found shot with their hands tied. It's not nice. I don't think in that scenario anyone comes away feeling particularly happy. But it's the problem again when you're using small forces and they're having to they're taking prisoners, because again, how many people do you leave to watch the prisoners to stop them attempting to do that sort of thing? This is how many people do you can't take with you fighting. You've got limited number of people you can fit in the boats. You've got limited number of people you can take. It's a limited operation. So you tie them up, you leave a couple with submachine guns watching them, and the rest of you go off and carry on the next objective. That makes sense. But that also means there's only two or one watching a whole load of prisoners who might try and make a break for it. And if they try and make a break, I think they can get away with it, they will. And in which case, then they're going to get machine gunned. It's just, it's a crappy situation. There's also always the fun. There's the theoretical strength of a commando and its realistic strength. Because the thing about commando operations is, whilst the unit was technically had 450 men and you know each divided down into troops and all these things, and commanded by a lieutenant colonel, you have the fact that they keep up a very high tempo of training, which causes injuries. They keep up a high tempo of operations, which causes injuries and unfortunately deaths. And then there's the normal wearing out of war. There's the high tempo. There's the fact that people do need a break from it occasionally. And you do have to send them home because otherwise you end up with something in the field which is not that useful. Which means when you start talking about unit strengths and you're going, yes, they had 450. How many did they have available for their operation? And that's before we get into the limiting factor of how many boats do you have that can take them? How many spaces do you have on the ship? So, but this group does a lot of interesting work, especially with the SOE. And at a certain point, they find themselves in early 93, they're being disbanded after various experiences, including something called Dieppe. Basically, Crete Dieppe. Not good experiences for the British forces. Not good. They cause a lot of trouble. And they get sent and joined in with what remains of certain forces in the Far East and in the Middle East. Not in the Mediterranean. Brain dying, sorry. There's banging and all sorts of things going on. Has been all day because we've got the roof being done. And basically, they get combined and eventually under a force which is under the command of Lieutenant Colonel Jellicoe. Yes, the Earl Jellicoe, and the Admiral's son. But we'll get that in a second. So, last group of SBS before the last gasp of SBS before coming full boat section. Their numbers have been dropping down. Okay, they peaked at about probably not far off 100 in terms of actual what's really going through, to keep up their strength under Courtney. But in sort of the scenario you have going on in the SAS, especially in the Mediterranean, is David Sterling has set up a very, very good empire. And it's very efficient and it's very well run. And it's achieving a lot of successes in the operations it's going for. So pretty much everything which is mildly special forces is getting sucked into that orbit. For a sensible, logical reason, you've got something which is working. And on this occasion, you have Operation Angelo. Only David Sutherland and Duggan aren't captured and managed to get back to the submarines. They have a lot of success, but after the loss of their captain, it's just folded into the SAS full boat section. It really is. And It's interesting. There is actually a movie starring Dirk Bogarde made in this day who dare. As an operation, it's broadly speaking successful. For their formation, it's devastating. So, the thing is, it doesn't stop there. The SAS Sterling gets captured, and then the formation gets pretty much divided down into the Special Raiding Squadron, which had been his original sort of setup, and the SBS, which are some of the SAS Full Boat Squadron and 62 Commando. And the SBS are put under command of Lieutenant Colonel George Jellicoe, the Earl, and they do all sorts of operations. There are all sorts of things they're sort of claimed as doing, and they do really quite well. The raid on Simri or Operation Tenement is my favourite. They use 10 motor launches, various other vessels, which are described as schooners and cakes, but honestly, some of them I'm not sure what you could describe them as. I do know that there's an E-boat at the end which comes across one of the cakes, I think it is, and gets blasted. So if you ever looked them up and looked up what a cake is, it's basically a fishing boat. If one of those is armed with enough weaponry to sink a E-boat or a Schnellboot before it even managed to get a round off, then my suggestion is it any longer a cake? Is it something cake or something more? But we'll leave that to one side. Um, the whole point is rather like what the Commandos are doing writ large in Northern Europe, in that they're tying up huge numbers of German troop formations. There's a huge garrison in Norway and all sorts of things. They do this down in the Mediterranean and Aegean, especially on the sort of the Adriatic, Polynesian Peninsula, the Albanian coast, and the Istria Peninsula in particular. It's claimed they tie down 6 divisions. Because they can pick and choose where they're going to fight. The Germans have to cover everywhere because they don't know where they're coming. I would add a little bit to this. Okay. I am a Special Forces fanboy as much as the next guy. But sole credit is not something I think you can put other things. I think there are partisan fighters and SOE doing their jobs, and they're often linking up with them. You know, when they go into Simri, there's a local there's some local partisans who help them out. There's all sorts of little things they get up to and they have assistance with. So, yeah. What I also find interesting is that the gentleman Major Anders Larsen is the only member of the Special Air Service to get the Victoria Cross during World War II, and he gets it with these guys. Interesting enough, though, these units are kind of how do I put this? Life shortening. 62 Commando, the Special Raiding Force people, had been commanded by a guy called Appleyard. He dies during the war. And Lassen, the Victoria Cross winner, dies during the war. Sterling captured, the SAS, of course. Tug Wilson captured while on an operation trying out little handheld torpedoes. Marine Hughes, who'd been with him on his previous operations, was too sick to go with him that time, so he took someone else. And Hughes, perennially, until he'd learnt his friend was still alive, felt that his being ill had caused his friend to die because he thought if he'd been with him, he'd have been okay. Because they'd been a partnership through so many raids, so many operations in the Praadzno. So, here's the summary. What interests me is these operations. There's a real sort of dichotomy going on them. There is a sort of a two-stroke approach. You have the not by strength, by guile. What's the SBS's modern motto? Although I think I prefer the bullshit beats brains one. But, not by strength, by guile. That, by the way, unassuming gentleman is Courtney, and that's his wife. That's nicked from the borrowed, referenced, of course, from the National Army Museum's page on Commandos. But here is his original specifications, which are really rather cool, so I'm going to expand that out. So, this is what he posted out looking for people. Are you a professional tough guy? I.e., do you imitate the film stars? Have you got the true conception of a tough guy? Are you the quiet type of man who would not be picked out in a crowd, the unassuming type who would be expected to be employed in professional business and never in the thuggery you might be engaged in? Are you prepared to do your job well and let the satisfaction of a job well done and the fact that you have got away with it be your sole reward? Are you prepared to take a spectacular risk just for the gallantry? Or just for the gallery? I think it's just for the gallery. Are you talkative in or out of your cubs? How great is your sense of responsibility? Do you realize that any unconsidered act on yours might risk a valuable submarine and the lives of 52 trained men? The cost of a submarine is £350,000, but this figure does not represent a part of its value to the war effort. You are two men in a 15-pound full boat, which is the more value to the war effort. Four, did you realize that the Navy is the unusually silent service? One hears very little boasting, and from past experience, the Navy are inclined to be a little bit critical of soldiers. Make it your business to get along well and earn their good opinions. You may owe your life to this later. Learn naval etiquette. Rank commander equals a lieutenant colonel. When and where to salute. Quarterdeck Colors Act. On board the submarine, the commander is the captain and will be addressed as Sir. Your job. You'll get an interesting jobs, mostly of a secret nature. Recce both for Army and Navy. Demolish, wrecking and sabotage, helping the secret intelligence people. You'll hear many interesting facts, as eye officers not connected with your job at all forget them. You will receive a standard data of what equipment is received for, say, particular job. Yet we are not infallible and may have left something out. Think of every contingency and cater for it before leaving. Remember, you might want something to waterproof and folding boats are scarce in the field. Chuck everything off the parent submarine into the full boat personally. I'm sorry, I should have had a larger copy of that out rather than on the screen. I prefer National Archives documents when I can read them in paper in front of me. But this is the point. The operations going on are two different strands of operations. You have the reconnaissance ones on one side and the taking out airfields on the other side. And the trouble is, okay, there's a reason the SAS style operations, SPS style operations are different, and there's a reason one works well in one scenario, one doesn't work well in the other, and it wouldn't work well in the other scenario. So, if you've got a two-man team going out, laying a charge, and getting away in the middle of the desert, they're going to be in a lot of trouble. You're going to have to send a lot of resources for getting those two men across. They're going to have to take a vehicle, which is going to make them stick out. If they're taking a vehicle anyway, why are you taking just two men? Probably should take four. If you're taking four men, then all you're going to do is put some charges over railway lines, which probably don't exist that much. That's pretty silly. But if you pick a group of these vehicles together, that makes sense. And you can now attack an airfield. If you're attacking an airfield with 4 or 5 men who are on foot, who've come off a folding boat from a submarine, they have no support. They also have they only have one extraction route. The whole point in the desert is you can go off in pretty much any direction with some good navigation, maybe by a circumferential route, get back. If you're in this scenario, if you're in the SBS scenario of the beaches, you have to get back to those folding boats. Which is why, really, the attacks on the airfields only really start to work once the special raiding squadron, the sort of small raiding group turns up. Number 62 Commando gets joined in, the small-scale raiding force. Because those bigger boats make more sense, but you're no longer launching from a landing craft. You're launching from something altogether bigger. So, being a commando works when you're a commando who can launch from something bigger, bring enough mass, take the hit, give the hit, and then get out. Special Force, you're a very small group. You're going in. You don't want to take hits. You're like a surface raider. The moment you get hit and injured is the moment you're at your weakest point. The moment the enemy you start fighting is the moment the enemy's found you. They can bring in more troops. You can't. All through the training, there are all these sort of operations going on. Crete is a good example of when it goes wrong. Most of the stuff which goes on in the Aegean and Adriatic and sort of all the areas around Greece and Italy, those are fairly good operations for the most part. Jellicoe does a fairly good job, but I would say this. Post-World War II, the SBS, when they are reformed, to an extent distance themselves from that force and from that formation. And in part, I think there is a logical reason for it. That is what the Royal Marine Commandos exist for. That's what the 3rd Commando Brigade exists for. They're a big commando formation. They've got their commandos. That's what their squadrons, their battalion equivalent units are actually called, commandos. They're for that. So if you're SBS, if you're a special force and you're going to exist, what are you going to do which is different from that? Well, we're going to do the sneaky peeky stuff. We're going to do the stuff which you need the very small elite group for. When you need the bigger group, you've got the full Royal Marines. And I think then we forget that differentiation at our peril. I think we really do. So that's why, to my mind, the SBS, the modern SBS, makes such an effort to draw itself from Courtney and the groups he goes on and organises in the Far East and various other places, rather than Jellicoe. Right, and what have we got coming up? Well, today, of course, it's the Little Boat Wars. Thursday, it's the outcome of the Spanish Armada. Strategy, technology, tactics, or luck. Next Tuesday, it's the Battle of Cape Passaro. Then it's HMS Emerald and Enterprise on Thursday. Hello. Then we have got Monday 17th, Patron video. Courtesy of Daniel Freeman. What if Sing Tones and Goes Hot? Model 2 begins in the Pacific in early 1939. With those introduction videos for that are going to have a special guest star, Daniel Freeman himself, because he sent me the question. And then he's been going off and doing his research and has these ideas and chatting away. I thought, well, why not? We'll do a joint one. What's funny is I was just about to send him an email about it, and then he sent me an email going, could I do a recording? And I went, yes, that'd be really quite cool. And why don't we do a joint one? So we're going to go through 4, possibly 5 scenarios as introduction videos. So I might well have those coming out on Sunday and going out Monday as well, because so that all spaced apart so people can see them. But we're going to have to record them this week so that I can edit them and put them all together. And then Thursday 20th, the Battle of Taxil. Tuesday 25th, could Crete have been saved in 1941? So this topic is providing a nice link between the submarines, which we looked at, and Crete, which is coming up later this month. Hey, look. Takes a lot of effort to make this look this disorganized sometimes. Right. And the Convoy War in a Perfect Storm of PQ-17. I'll leave it to your mind what in here is that is going to link into that. And 31st, Patron video for number 5, courtesy of Bale and Nora, Mediterranean gunboat diplomacy in the Victorian era. And where else can you find me? Please, where else can you find me? We've got Twitter, we've got Patron, and we've got Global Maritime History. Patron is really, really nice to the people who are on it. Thank you to all the people who are my £3 donors. All that money is put towards books, which are kind of critical in my profession. But yeah, let's put it this way, my normal summer job isn't exactly here at the moment, so this is being really, really helpful. So thank you to everyone who's that. And thank you to everyone who follows me on here, subscribes on here, and subscribes to Twitter. And thank you to everyone who likes the videos. Just thank you. And see you in a bit. Take care.